We're going to begin by reading John Donne. We're going to spend half of our semester on John Donne, and we're going to have a look at the introduction by reading Wikipedia's John Donne. Okay, John Donne. Born on 24th January. When he was born wasn't clear, right? Between 24th January to 19th of June, 1572. Not clear when he was born, but definitely he was born in 1572. Died on 31st March, 1631. John Donne was an English poet and a cleric in the Church of England. He is considered the preeminent representative of the metaphysical poets. His works are noted for their strong sensual style, include sonnets, love poems, list poems, Latin translations, epigrams, elegies, songs, satires, and sermons. His poetry is noted for his vibrancy of language and inventiveness of metaphor, especially compared to that of his contemporaries. Donne's style is characterized by abrupt openings and various paradoxes, ironies, and dislocations. These features, along with his frequent dramatic or everyday speech rhythms, his tense syntax is tough eloquence for both the reaction against the smoothness of conventional Elizabethan poetry and the adaptation into English of European Baroque and Mannerist techniques. His early career was marked by poetry that bore immense knowledge of English society, and he met that knowledge with sharp criticism. Another important theme in Donne's poetry is the idea of true religion, something he spent much time considering. Considering and about which he often theorized. He wrote secular poems as well as erotic and love poems. John Donne is particularly famous for his mastery and the metaphysical conceits. Conceit means what? Comparison. Despite the great education and poetic talent, Donne lived in poverty for several years, relying heavily on wealthy friends. He spent much of the money he inherited during and after his education on womanizing, literature, pastimes, and travel. In 1601, Donne secretly married Anne More, with whom he had 12 children. In 1615, he became an Anglican priest. Although he did not want to take Anglican orders, he did so because King James I persistently ordered it. In 1621, he was appointed the Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. He also served as a member of Parliament in 1601 and in 1614. In 1962, his works were cited by physicist Robert Oppenheimer as having been the inspiration for choosing the code name Trinity for the first nuclear bomb test. Okay. Biography, early life. Okay. Marriage to Anne More, career and later life. Poetry, early poetry. Donne's early poems show the developed knowledge of English society coupled with sharp criticism of its problems. His satires dealt with common Elizabethan topics such as corruption in the legal system, mediocre poets, and pompous courtiers. His images of sickness, vomit, manure, and plague reflect the strongly satiric view of a world populated by all the fools and knaves of England. His third satire, however, deals with the problem of true religion in a matter of great importance to Donne. He argued that it was better to examine carefully one's religious convictions than blindly to follow any established tradition, for none would be saved at the final judgment by claiming Harry or Martin taught them this. Okay, Donne's early career was also notable for his erotic poetry, especially his elegies, in which he employed unconventional metaphors such as flea biting two lovers being compared to sex. An elegy 19, okay. To his mistress going to bed, he poetically undressed his mistress and compared the act of fondling to the exploration of America. Okay. Style. His work has received much criticism over the years, especially concerning his metaphysical form. Donne is generally considered the most important member of the metaphysical poets, a phrase coined in 1781 by Samuel Johnson, another poet, following a comment on John by John Dryden. John Dryden had written of Donne in 1693. He affects the metaphysics not only in his satires, but in his amorous verses, when nature only should reign and perplexed the minds of the fair sex with nice speculations of philosophy, when he should enrage their hearts and entertain them with the softness of love. Okay. Next paragraph. Donne is considered the master of the metaphysical conceit, an extended metaphor that combines two vastly different ideas into a single idea, often using imagery. An example of this is the equation of lovers with saints in Canonization. We are going to read Canonization today. Unlike the conceits found in other Elizabethan poetry, most notably Petrarchan conceit, which form cliched comparisons between more closely related objects such as rose and love, metaphysical conceits go to a greater depth in comparing two completely unlike objects. One of the most famous Donne's conceits found in A Valediction Forbidding Mourning, where he compares two lovers who are separated to the legs of a compass. This is the most famous poem, this one, okay, A Valediction Forbidding Mourning. Donne's works are also witty, employing paradoxes, puns, and subtle yet remarkable analogies. His pieces are often ironic, cynical, especially regarding love and women, human motifs. Common subjects of Donne's poems are love, especially in his early life, and death, especially after his wife's death, religion. Okay, now why don't we go to the essay done by a great scholar. Frank Kermode, the longer essay. Okay, when you quote something from this essay, usually you have to give the citation, right? You have the essay is taken from this book, and the book's title is Shakespeare, Spenser, Donne, and subtitle is Renaissance Essays. The author is Frank Kermode. The publisher is Routledge, and in London, and published in 1971. Right? Okay, chapter 5. Okay, John Donne, page 116. The essay is divided into how many sections? Let me see. 8, 9. Okay, 9 sections. what does it mean? At least there are 9 important ideas. Nine important main ideas, right? Okay, in section 1. Section 1 must be what? It must be an introduction to the essay. Let's see, okay? To have read Donne was one's evidence of man's curious taste. Evidence of man's curious taste. So John Donne was what? Very unique personality, right? Usually people do not read it, right? If I say, I read John Donne, you must be very curious, right? Now, though the vogue may be fading, it is a minimum requirement of civilized literary talk. Now, he is the standard, right? You must know John Donne, right? To be a civilized person is a requirement, right? We have seen the history of English poetry rewritten by critics, convinced of its cardinal importance. This change was partly the effect of the reception into England of French symbolist thought. So they were under the influence of French symbolism, right? Literally symbolism, right? And its assimilation to the native doctrines of Blake, Coleridge, and Pater. William Blake, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and Walter Pater. Right? Poison critics were struck by the way Donne exhibits the play of an agile mind within the sensuous body of poetry, so that even his most passionate poems work by wit, abounding in argument and analogy. The poetry and the argument cannot be abstracted from each other. Right? And this was interesting because the new aesthetic was founded on a hatred for the disembodied intellect, for abstract argument, for what the French called littérature. A series of poets, culminating Mr. Eliot, proclaimed their affinity with John Donne. They also searched the path in order to discover the moment when the blend of thought and passion that came so naturally to Donne and with such difficulty to themselves developed this modern inaccessibility. One answer was that this occurred during the lifetime of John Milton, who helped to create the difficulties under which modern poetry labors. This very characteristic symbolist historical myth is usually called by the name Mr. Eliot gave it, the dissociation of sensibility. Mr. Eliot has altered his views on Donne and Milton, but his new opinions have been less powerful than the older ones. But it remains true that to write of the fortunes of Donne in the past 7 years is, in effect, to write less about him than about the aesthetic preoccupations of that epoch. Donne has been distorted to serve this myth, but it is true that earlier criticism had treated him harshly. Ben Jonson suggested his kind of poetry runs the risk of neglect, especially in periods that value perspicuity. Dryden thought of him as great wit rather than as a poet. A normal late 17th century view of Donne was that his eminent poet became a much more eminent preacher. Johnson's brilliant critiques occurs more or less excellently in his Life of Coleridge and Lamb. Browning and George Eliot admired him, but Goss, and what is still the standard biography, is patronizing about the poetry and calls Donne's influence almost entirely malign. The revaluation of Donne has certainly been radical. The present is more probably a favorable moment for a just estimate. The past 50 years have provided essential apparatus, and though the time for partisan extravagance has gone, so has the time for patronage. So what? This is an introduction. So it is timely for us to study John Donne now, right? He was misunderstood, right? Or undervalued, right? But now it's time to re-evaluate his status as a poet, right? Okay, section 2. Donne was born early in 1572 of a Roman Catholic parents. His mother was of good family, and since she numbered among her kinsmen Maurice, Heywood, Rustel, Donne could well claim in his Apologia at the beginning of the anti-Jesuit Pseudo-Martyr that his family had endured much for the Roman doctrine. His own brother was arrested for concealing a priest and died in prison. His father, preposterous city tradesman, died when Donne was not yet 4, leaving a portion of about £750. A more enduring legacy was his early indoctrination by Jesuits. To his intimate acquaintance with their persecution under Elizabeth, he attributes his interest in suicide. His right to characterize as mistaken the Jesuit thirst for martyrdom by the hostile civil power, pseudo-martyr. In fact, his whole life and work were strongly affected by this circumstance of his childhood. He suffered materially, for example. As a Roman Catholic, he was disabled from taking a degree at Oxford, but more important, his mind was cast in the mold of learned religion. We know that during his years at the Inns of Court, in the early 90s, he read much besides law, that he explored many fields and many languages, and though described as a great visitor of the ladies, rose at 4 every morning and rarely left his chamber before 10. Much, if not most, of his reading must have been theological in character. So, he became a learned man by reading a lot of things, right? So, without reading a lot, you could be nothing, right? So, Donne traveled in Italy and Spain. In 1596 and 1597, took part in naval expeditions. In 1598, he became secretary to the influential Sir Thomas Egerton. But his secret marriage to Lady Egerton's niece, Anne More, in December 1601, put an end to his hopes of worldly success. His father had Donne imprisoned. Her father had Donne imprisoned and dismissed his post. He even tried to have the marriage annulled. Very unwise father, right? He made the daughter unhappy, right? Donne's dignified apologies prevailed, but he did not achieve reinstatement, and for some years lived somewhat glimly and inconveniently in what he called my hospital at Mitcham, burdened and distracted by illness, poverty, and growing family. The letter describes him writing in the noise of 3 gamesome children, and by the side of her, whom I have transplanted into a wretched fortune. He complained in dark and memorable phrases of his hatred inactivity. He sought patronage and had it of the Countess of Bedford, of the King's favorite Carr, and of Sir Robert Drolly. He worked as assistant to Morton, later Bishop of Durham, in anti-romantic polemic, but refused to take orders when Morton requested. The belated payment of his wife's dowry gave him a period of relief, in which he wrote more and published for the first time Pseudo-Martyr in 1610, Ignatius' Conclave in 1611, the 2 poems of Elizabeth Drolly's death in 1611 and 1612. Athanatos, which he forbade both the priest and the fire, belongs to this time, and the essays in divinity were written in 1614. When the king had made it plain that he would advance Donne only with the church, the poet finally took orders. In 1616, he was appointed reader in divinity at Lincoln's Inn, where over the years he both gave and received great satisfaction. A limited audience suited Donne, although this one must have been well informed about those useful indiscretions concerning which the lack of evidence has ever impeded one's speculation. He was accepted as the pertinent he claimed to be, and the audience would remember St. Augustine. Donne had found this true genre. His wife died in 1617. Her memory is celebrated by a fine sonnet and great sermon. Donne was left with 7 children. He was made Dean of St. Paul's in 1621 and became the most famous preacher, invested with some sanctity, happy in the rejection of the mistress of my youth, poetry, for the wife of mine age, divinity. In 1623, he was seriously ill, and during his illness wrote devotions upon emergent occasions, a series of religious meditations on the course of his disease, which is striking evidence of his continuing ability to be witty on all topics. With all this solemnity, it has a macabre playfulness and hospitable wit. His sermons are often surprisingly impersonal. We learn of his family anxieties, the death of a daughter, a son missing in action, his own death departure abroad in 1619, and this remorse for past sins. In the end, he brought his own death into the pulpit, having wished to die there, and practiced the appalling sermons called Death Duel before Charles I in Lent 1631. His ordering of the monument, which survived the fire, London fire, and is still in St. Paul's, and his almost histrionic composure on his deathbed, Walton has made famous. This aspect of Donne has perhaps been overstressed. He and death are a little too closely associated. This can be corrected only by prolonged readings in the sermons, perhaps by reminding oneself of his marked interest in life, his desire for success, which made him be independent of the dubious car, or his rich and varied friendship with Goodyear, with his scientist Earl of Northumberland, and with and Lady Danvers and her sons, George and Edward Herbert, with Johnson and Wharton, many of them central to the intellectual life of the time. But it is still true that he was a somber man, a melancholic even, and that at a time when the quality was associated with the highest kind of wit. Okay, section 3. Maybe he is going to talk about the poem. Section 3. Wit is a quality allowed Donne by all critics of all parties. People think that he's witty, right? In his own time, people admired his strong lines. Perhaps the best way of giving a general account of his wit is to try to explain what the expression meant. Donne is notoriously an obscure poet. Nobody knows him. Nobody knew him, right? In fact, his obscurity is often overestimated, but he's never easy. This is often because his manner is tortuous and, in his own word, harsh. Carrier's famous tribute emphasized the strain he put on language. To the awe of thy imperious wit, our stubborn language band. Carrier speaks of his masculine expression. Donne himself, of his masculine persuasive force. There was a contemporary taste for this kind of a thing, probably to an old tradition that it was right for some kinds of poetry to be obscure. And Donne was not writing for the many. He expected his readers to enjoy difficulty not only in the scholastic ingenuity of his arguments, but in the combination of complicated verse forms and apparently spontaneous thought. Thought that doubled back, corrected itself, broke off in passionate interjections. This kind of writing belongs to a rhetorical tradition ignored by much Elizabethan poetry, which argued that language could directly, discreetly represent the immediate play of mind, style as the instantaneous expression of thinking. And this is why Donne, if I may translate from Mario Praz, what I take to be the best thing ever said about Donne's style, will always appeal to readers whom the rhythm of thought itself attracts by virtue of his own peculiar convolutions. Okay, 잘 done. Obviously, this is a limited appeal. Ben Jonson, himself not a stranger to the strong line, was only the first to accuse Donne overdoing it. He recommended a middle course between jejune smoothness and manner consciously rough. But for a while, strong lines applied to prose as well as verse was a eulogistic term. So Fuller could praise those of Cleveland, saying that his epithets, adjectives, were pregnant with metaphors, carrying in them difficult plainness, difficult at the hearing, plain at the considering thereof. But there was opposition to what Walton called the strong lines now in fashion. Witness, for example, Courbet's good nonsense poem, Epilogus incerti autoritis autoris, a heap of paradoxes beginning like to the mowing tone of unspoke speeches and ending. Even such is man who died, yet did laugh to read these strong lines for his epitaph, which not only parodies Donne, but foretells the fate of strong lines. It degenerated into a joke, and until recently, recurred only in comic poetry. Humps, legislating for new poetry in the 50s, called them no better than riddles. The taste for strong lines is not universal, but nor are the powers they require poets. As strong lines directly record mental activity, they contain concepts, or in the contemporary form of the world, conceits, comparison. The meaning we now attach to this word is a specialization directly due to the vogue for strong lines. The value of such lines obviously depends on the value, and that is almost the same thing as the strangeness of the concepts they express. And these were usually metaphors. A high valuation was placed on metaphor, on the power of making what Dr. Johnson, who understood without approving, what Dr. Johnson called the discordia concourse. The world was regarded as a vast divine system of metaphors. The mind was at its fullest stretch when observing that. Peculiar ability in this respect was called acutezza by the Italians and by the English wit. But although the movement was European in scope, it is unnecessary to suppose that Donne owed much to his Spanish and Italian exponents. They were known in England, but they conspicuously lacked Donne's colloquial convolution and his argumentativeness. Johnson's mistake in reporting Marino as a source has often been repeated. Marino has strength, but not harshness, not the masculine persuasive force. We cannot think of Donne without thinking of relentless argument. It depends heavily on dialectical sleight of hand, arriving at the point of wit by subtle syllogistic misdirections, inviting admiration by slight but significant perversities of analog, which reroute every argument to paradox. Still, in view of the lack of contemporary English criticism on these points, it is wise to learn what we can from continental critics of beauty poetry, and the most important lesson, brilliantly suggested by S.L. Batchel, is that they regarded the concept of argument, making a new and striking point by syllogism, concealing a logical error as the highest and rarest kind of conceit. This is Donne's commonest device. Of course, we are aware that we are being cleverly teased, but many love poems like the ecstasy or the flea depend on our wonder outlasting our critical attitude to argument. The first poem is that it must be flea, right? Flea. Make mark but this flea and mark in this. How little that which thou deniest me is. It sucked me first and now sucks thee. And in this flea our bloods mingled be. Thou knowest that these cannot be said, a sin nor shame, nor loss of maidenhead. Yet this enjoys before it ooh, and pampered swells with one blood made of two, and this alas is more than we would do. Oh say, 3 lives in one flea spare, where we almost, more than married be. This flea is you and I, and this our marriage bed. Marriage temple is, though parents grouse and you, we've met and cloistered in these living walls of jet. Though use make you apt to kill me, let that not self-murder added be, and sacrilege 3 times, 3 sins in killing 3. Cruel and Sordain, hast thou sinned, purple thy nail in blood of innocence, wherein could this flea guilty be, except in the drop which it sucks from thee? Yet thou triumphest, and sayest that thou findest not thyself, nor me the weaker now. 'Tis true then, learn how false fears be, just so much honor when thou yieldst to me, well washed in this fleece that took life from thee. The spelling is what? Archaic, right? The Norton Anthology has footnotes, all the footnotes. So, no problem. This poem, which was enormously admired by Donne's contemporaries, is cited here merely as an example of his logical way of wooing by false syllogism. So, in the Ecstasy, another poem, the argument, a tissue of fallacies, sounds solemnly convincing and consecutive, so that it is surprising to find it ending with an immodest proposal. The highest powers of the mind are put to base use, but internally demonstrated in process. Part of Donne's originality lies precisely in the use of such methods of amorous poetry. Properly, they belong to the sphere of religion. Of course, there is always much commerce between the two. This human wit suggests the large design of God's wit in the creation is immemorially associated with biblical exegesis, preaching, sanctioned and practiced by Ambrose and Augustine, and blended in the patristic tradition with the harshness of Tertullian, as well as with the enormous eloquence of Chrysostom. The Europe of Donne's time had enthusiastically taken up witty preaching, but the Gasto Español, as it's called, though associated with the Counter-Reformation, is essentially a revival of what Professor Curtis would call the mannerism of the patristic tradition. Now, this tradition was venerated by Church of England, a learned church, which reject the Puritan aphorism. So much Latin, so much flesh. And the fathers could provide not only doctrine, but examples of Ignatium, that acuity of observation by which the preacher could best illustrate and express the word. Donne's useful examination of the whole body of divinity across controversy between the Church of England and Rome provided him not only with the religion, but with a style. Some aspects of this Jesuit training would help him in the business of analogy, but primarily the conceit of his secular poetry is derived from his later religious studies. It is in fact a new paradoxical use for amorous purposes of the concerto predicabile. The preacher's conceit, as usual, we see him all over piece, at all paradox. Donne the poet, with all his nationalist passion, knowingness, obscenity, indeed is anima naturalite theologica. What made him a poet now made him an Anglican, the re-evaluation of a tradition. Okay, I'll stop here and let's go to the poem, one of the poems. We'll finish the rest of the essay next time. Okay, why don't you read the essay and make a summary about... okay, two summaries. One is the summary of from section 1 to 4, right? Another one is from section 1 to 3, and another one is on section 4 to 9, okay? Okay, on a sheet of paper, right? Half page, right? Use half page to do one summary, okay? Okay, and okay, let's go to the poem, the Canonization. I think this is one of the most famous poems by John Donne. The Canonization. For God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love, or chide my palsy or my gout, my 5 gray hairs, ruined fortune flout. With wealth, your state, your mind, with arts improve. Take you a course, get your place, observe his honor or his grace, or the king's real, or his tempered face, contemplate. What you will approve, so you will let me love. Alas, alas, who's injured by my love? What merchant ships have my sighs drowned? Who says my tears have overflowed his ground? When did my coals a forward spring remove? When did the hit which my veins feel add one more to the plaguey bill? Soldiers find words and lawyers find out still a litigious man, which quarrels move, though she and I do love. Call us what you will, we are made such by love. Caller 1, me, another fly. We are tapers too, and at our own coast die. And we in us find the eagle and the dove. The phoenix riddle hath more wit by us. We two being one are it. So, to one neutral thing both sexes fit. We die and rise the same, prove mistress by this love. We can die by it, if not live by love. And if unfit for tombs and hearth, our legend be, it will be fit for verse. And if no piece of chronicle we prove, we'll build in sonnets pretty rooms. As well, a well-wrought urn becomes the greatest ashes, a half-acre tombs, and by these hymns all shall approve, as approve us, canonized for love. And thus invoke us, you whom reverent love made one another's hermitage, you to whom love was peace, that now is rage. Who did the whole world's soul extract and drove into the glasses of your eyes, so made such mirrors and such spies, that they did all to you epitomize. Countries, towns, course, back from above, pattern of your love. Actually, there is a lot of inversions here, so read it very slowly. And you have, if you look at them, the poem is very logical, right? There is a lot of meaning in it, so look for it. So each sentence is a perfect sentence, right? So there is a lot of footnotes below, so look at them while reading the poem. It will take 10 minutes break, and then we'll go back to the poem, okay?